Yeah, so I started in politics like nearly 40 years ago, which is a long time ago. But then it was more not related to mobility or urban development, more about the nuclear war, inequalities in society. And then at a certain point, I decided to stop with politics. But I went back in politics like 20 years ago because I was living for a couple of years in Brussels at the time, and still today, of course. And I didn't like a lot what was happening with the city. I was walking a lot. I saw you couldn't bike in the city. It was really, really dangerous at the time. There was all the squares were full with cars, parked cars. The sidewalks, they were pretty small. There were no really terraces, no rooftop bars. All that thing was not there. And so when they gave me the opportunity to go back to politics, I say, yeah, I'm going to do it because it's for my city. And so I entered in it. And, when I do something, I want to have a vision, I want to have an objective. And then, sometimes in politics, it takes some time to change attitudes. And so 20 years ago, Brussels was a very car-oriented city. They shouted at me at the streets, go back to Flanders with your bike because we don't bike in Brussels. And of course, in the northern part of Belgium, Flanders, people bike. And I grew up with a bike. So I wanted to bike in Brussels too, like many other people, basically. But there was no space for it. So this became one of my fights in order to not to be against the car because everybody uses a car once in a while or needs a car once in a while somehow. So I just, it's about redistributing public space. And so that was the start of it, making Brussels a better city, a less car-oriented city, a city with better architecture, public space, very important as the living room, meeting place in a city. So that was been doing the last 20 years.
Did not grow up in Brussels, but you
No,
grew up in Flanders,
yeah,
and you wanted to introduce the bike-friendly way of growing up from Flanders into Brussels. Because actually, I
yeah,
am also from Flanders, and when I think about it, when I went to elementary school, when I went to high school, we always used our bike. It was a part of life, and when you graduated from elementary, going to high school, everybody received a bike as a gift, so you could go a little bit farther to high school. So it was actually part of our life. We use it as a way to transport, to go to parties. But when I was studying at the HUB in Brussels, it was a whole new world because the taxis were driving crazy, the buses were driving crazy, and I was afraid to use the Velo bikes actually because it was all a bit too hectic. How do you perceive the evolution of Brussels transportation landscape during your time in politics, and what significant changes have you witnessed?
yeah. A lot, of course, changed the last 20 years. And I think when Bloomberg wrote a couple of weeks ago his article about how Brussels can be an example for American cities, I think that is crazy because it is what it is. We came from far. So what did we do? The first thing on bikes was that I wanted to make bikes visible in the city because like 20 years ago, 25, 20 years ago, cyclists were really an exception. It were pioneers. People were sometimes really risking their lives, and there was no space for cyclists. So the first thing we did was painting all these bike lanes on the ground in order to say to car drivers, there might be a cyclist coming up here. But not only bike lanes, on every crossroad, we painted like these spaces when the light turns red, that cyclists could go in front of the cars, and when the light turns green, they can start first.
Yeah.
So that was important too. We started to put bike racks in the city everywhere. We introduced the bike sharing system, which was at the time still station-based Velo, the coach system. We also allowed cyclists to take the other way direction in a street so that they could move faster. And of course, we started also with the construction of separated, secured, and bike lanes, which is essential if you want to get people, especially women with children or men with children, doesn't matter, to get them on a bike. So this whole thing of measures combined with Car Free Sunday, because once a year we block the whole of the city region of Brussels, 162 square kilometers of cars, and so bikes are the places, all over. So people saw it was possible. And maybe one more thing, we try to change the mentality because you're right. In the northern part of Belgium, it's more like the northern Scandinavian kind of tradition where the bike is considered as an everyday mean of transport. While in the French speaking and Latin world part of Europe, the bike is more seen as something for the free time. You know, that's what you use in the weekend if you want to go out and do something. But it's not really seen as a mean of transport, and to some extent it's understandable because if you go to the southern part of Belgium, Wallonia, they are much more hilly,
Exactly.
distances are far, much more far, so that's a little bit understandable. But it's a culture thing, and you also see it in Italy or Spain or the south of France, where cycling is more considered as free time, loisir, and not as thing. So it's also about changing the mentality combined with doing infrastructure works, and then you get the result. Because today we have lots of cyclists in Brussels, and even traffic jams of cyclists. So who could ever imagine that we were going to have that in Brussels?
Exactly. I can imagine back in the days when you started, it was a little bit, you were maybe an outsider or maybe a revolutionary thinking about bikes because I guess it was a car centric society. Because I remember seeing a picture of the Grand Place. It actually used to be a parking. I saw a picture with a lot of like cars, and I couldn't imagine that such a great place how it is right now, a great place for tourists and everything, that it used to actually be a parking. Just it just goes to show the mentality from back in the days. So I can imagine for someone